Hi, this is Michael William Denny of thundershamanism.com, and today I'm going to talk to you about another chapter in the book, The Thunder Wizard Path. And if you're not familiar with my work, click on Thunder Shamanism. You can see all my books and DVDs and other things that I'm doing. But this was really my first book, even though it was the second one I published. I would really consider this my first book. And so it was towards the beginning of when I was making a lot of my conclusions and doing a lot of my research. And, the good news is that the majority of it still holds up for me, all these years later. But a lot of my thinking has changed, and I've evolved in my thought process a lot. I talk about the original gospel, and I said some things, which, I guess this part is true. I came to the conclusion that had it not been for the Catholic Church that was mandating, people to convert to Christianity, that Jesus would have been absorbed into the pagan heathen pantheon, just like Buddha was absorbed into the Hindu pantheon within India. Outside of India, Buddha is, all by himself. But within India, he became one of the 10 avatars of Vishnu. So I believe that they would have done that. Now, at that time, I was operating from a different idea. I gave some legitimacy to the gospel and to things like Gnosticism. My feelings have changed since then, and I believe that all of Christianity is an imposition. It's a false external politically motivated invention, and really isn't coming out of any what I would consider to be a legitimate tradition. I know it's going to hurt a lot of people's feelings if they might be Christian, but I've talked about it a lot. If you want to read more about that, get the book Odin Says Jesus Was a Coward. So there's a few things in that book that are still that aren't quite how I see things now. But I want to talk about the chapter called Religion versus Spirituality or something like that. And the reason why I wrote that is because I had an interesting experience. So as I shared with you, by the way, if you haven't watch the earlier videos of me talking about this book, and you'll understand, what I went through to get to at least partly to where I'm at now. But I had no idea when Hulda contacted me and introduced me to the gods and the religion of my ancestors. And when I started reading the myths, the Norse myths, as a specifically trying to reconnect, and all of the stuff that was happening to me, and I was getting all of these visions and experiences, and all this information was getting downloaded into me from my ancestors. I was completely clueless to the fact that there was this thing called heathenism. I knew that there was paganism, and I knew that there was Wicca, and I knew that there was Druidism, but I was just, I was clueless that there was this whole thing called heathenism and, heathen reconstructionism. I had no idea this existed. So I'm doing a lot of this work, and I'm having all these experiences, and I'm wanting to share it with people. And so I start looking for, assuming I'm going to find the Germanic equivalent of Druidism. So if you're not familiar with Druidism, it's an attempt to reconstruct Celtic British paganism. And they know the thing about the Druids is that they know that they don't have the majority of the information. They're reconstructing it and doing the best that they can, and they know that. And it's actually a very wonderful tradition. Most Druids are very accepting, they're very tolerant, they're very universalist in their approach in terms of allowing everybody to have their scenario, their feeling. They do want to connect to their own spiritual path. And actually, as it is, because it's such a tolerant path, there's a lot of people of Germanic descent who go to Druidism because they can't tolerate the intolerance and the outright racism that is found in a lot of heathenism. Now, I know there's a lot of heathens who aren't racists. I know there are some that are racialist but aren't racist. There are folkish heathens and all kinds of other things like that. But I was just shocked because I started reaching out to people who are worshiping Thor and Odin, like I was connecting with them. And once they saw what I was doing, I got slammed. I mean, I had never been slammed that hard in my life by anybody. And these guys just came at me with everything that they had and calling me all kinds of horrible names. And it was like, whoa, where the hell is this coming from? You know, and then I found out real quick that for a lot of these people, Germanic polytheism had a very strong connection to racism, outright racism. And I got to be real with you about it. Now, first, let me give a disclaimer. On the one hand, we have to be honest that specifically the Germanic tradition has been the most obliterated of all of them. You know, we've been romanticizing Celtic traditions for a very long time, and it was done by Germanic people. Germanic people, you know, and even if you ask people now, you know, people are British, even if they're of Anglo-Saxon descent, there's still this unconscious connection to Arthur and Merlin, as those are my predecessors, even if genetically they have no connection to them or very little connection to them. And that's because the Germanic people were the last of the European people, the major European people, whose religion was taken from them. And what was replaced in that was just outright shame. They were shamed for their pagan past. And they were shamed for being Germanic. To be seen as Germanic was to be seen as being a barbarian. You know, they were the most primitive. You know, the Celts had spent a lot of time being Romanized long before the Germanic tribes had been. You know, and even the Vikings were the last to convert, and they're still to this day seen as barbarians. And pagan barbarians and all that. So there was an atmosphere of shame connected to being Germanic and pagan. And so for hundreds of years, you know, French people and English people and even Germanic people would romanticize the Celtic polytheists, even though the Welsh people were Christians. They were Roman civilized Christians by the time that the Anglo-Saxons were invited into Great Britain. But we still have this false history about, you know, the Germanic people. So, you know, racism is all about self-hatred, and people who are overcompensating for their own insecurity. And so when you feel like a barbarian, when you feel like you don't belong, when you feel, you know, that you've been made to feel bad or worthless, what do? You compensate by saying, no, I'm the best, I'm the greatest. And this is where we get white supremacy from. And so the reality of the fact is that modern heathenism has its genesis, you know, in times before World War II. And the Germans back then, the nationalism that was going on, they were connecting to the Norse myths, but they were also, because remember, Germany was an outcast for a long period of time. The Roman Empire, they were right on the borders of the Roman Empire, and they were the barbarians. You know, so there's still this, you know, this self-hatred and shame within the Germanic mindset, you know, and it's been pushed down into, you know, the DNA of our thought processes. And so, you know, it's only natural that people overcompensate by that. And that's all that racism is. It's an overcompensation for feeling insecure. And we have to understand the root of it, because if we don't understand the root of it, then all we do is we just feel bad and guilty. Yes, my ancestors were racists and slave traders, and yes, but I'm not like them, you know, and that's nothing more than just reverse racism. You know, I could get into that. But until we really honestly look at it, you know, our ancestors were you know, they went through a tremendous Holocaust, spiritual and otherwise, and that shame has never been addressed. And because the shame has never been addressed, then you've got racism. And we see it now in the political landscape of the U.S. right now, 2016, summer of 2016. You know, there are news stories about how, you know, the new party that's coming through with Trump and others like that is white nationalism, you know, in America. So listen, this stuff isn't going away, and it won't go away until we look at the root of it. And the root of it is, you know, the Catholics and the Romans came in and shamed and guilted and killed and slaughtered us out of our religion. And in order to survive, we ingested this self-hatred and this shame, and it's now erupting in, you know, the 20th century and throughout, you know, the last 500 years as racism and slavery. We're not going to get rid of racism and slavery until we own that understanding. So that's all that, when it comes to heathenism, it was born out of this movement. It was born out of Germany in World War II, coming out of World War I, feeling, again, all this shame and guilt. And so what they do, they overcompensate and they create the Nazi Party and white supremacy and the German Uber people and all that other complete, total horseshit nonsense. And then in the late 60s and early 70s, some guys in the West decided that they wanted to recreate what they called, their ancestral tradition, but it was based on political and racial motives. And so from the beginning of modern heathenism, it's been infused with racial and political nonsense. Racism within paganism. Racism and paganism? How does that go together? It doesn't mix. But here's where I've come. The evolution of my thinking is this. Listen, we've been damaged tremendously. We've been spiritually and mentally and emotionally and psychologically damaged for the past, 2,500 years because of imperialism that has, attacked and destroyed our native shamanic spiritual practice. And so we have to heal from that. And so in order to heal, we have to take baby steps. And the first baby step is people have to overcompensate. That's what insecure people do. It's the first step to getting their sense of self back. They have to overcompensate. The next step is they say, this is only for white people. We can't, if you're from another culture or another race or religion, you can't have our gods. That's, little kids do that. It's my toy, you can't play with it. That just means that, they got to go through their stages of infancy and they got to grow. So at some point in time, like the majority of people who are probably watching my channel, you've gotten past that. You've worked past those issues. And eventually, heathenism will get to that place as well. Because our ancestors weren't racist, because if they were, they wouldn't have populated and, gone into Europe and into Africa and into Asia and into Arabia. They wouldn't have gone into all those places and set up, settlements, and they wouldn't have fused into those cultures. The Vikings were very quick to adopt cultures and religions and all that kind of stuff. So they weren't racist. So the idea that being a Viking is somehow being a white supremacist is not historically accurate. So I could go on and on and on and on and on, but I won't. So again, I'm pushing these two things because I want to make sure that I'm doing more than just giving you intellectual fodder to read and to think about. You've got to have practical action to put this power back in your body, to really get the power of our gods, the power of our ancestral heritage. So celestial qigong is one of the most powerful energy practices I know. I suggest that you do that. It'll make your rituals go through the roof. And I suggest if you really want to learn how to take this information I'm giving you and put it into practical use to become an apprentice, it means you work with me for 1 hour a week. People who become my apprentice get over $3,000 worth of other teaching materials that you would have to actually pay for piecemeal. So even if you're an apprentice with me for a year, you're going to save tons of money just by getting all this other stuff. So click on apprenticeship below. So that's it for the book, The Thunder Wizard Path. We'll start another DVD series about some other books. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, you can call me at this number. If you have more questions about apprenticeship, give me a call. If you just want to hear a voice on the other end of the phone and see that I'm a real person. So until next time, my friends, thank you. And may the gods and the spirits of our ancestors be with us all.